The uncannily wise, resourceful, and resilient Zadig, whose name derives from the Arabic Sadik, S-A-D-I-K, which means just, justice, you know, the just. Zadig undergoes a number of trials and tribulations, and when faced with the disconcerting instances of injustice and suffering, and with the unpredictability and apparent randomness of life in general, he anxiously questions and even objects to the notion of a world regulated by a benevolent providence. That's iffy for a person to, I mean, he's quite brave. It's no wonder saying things like that. I don't think there is a God. This is a crappy world. What kind of God would make this world? No, this isn't a good world. Saying things like that. It's a good thing he was on the cusp of the Renaissance. Any earlier and he would have been burned. Or the Enlightenment, pardon me. Any earlier and he would have been burned. But Zadig eventually overcomes adversity and reluctantly submits to the reassuring belief that providence works in mysterious ways and unfathomable ways for the ultimately greater good of humanity. So, eventually he submits to the reassuring belief. You can question it for a while, say I'm not sure, but eventually you'll feel better, they say. That's what they say. Now, I did a video on this, said religion cannot make you feel better. What it can do, if Zadig, it says here, Zadig submits to the reassuring belief, what they should have said was Zadig finally gave up his mind and quit thinking about it and became a neurotic who was just evading his own realizations of reality. He realizes it's a crappy world, and he realizes that there's nobody up there helping us and that the sky is empty. There's no one above us. Above us only sky. But then, in order to be comfortable and reassured, supposedly, you know, but that destroys your self-esteem. It destroys your mind. And that is no way to get to a feeling of comfort and reassurance, you know, to abandon your mind. So they say that, but it couldn't be true. Not only is it not true, it couldn't be. Alright, we skip quite a ways here. Now, he didn't get burned at the stake. He did have a bit of trouble, like he had to run from Frederick and stuff. But, quote, "It was customary for Voltaire to deny the paternity of his most potentially controversial writings by mischievously attributing them to imaginary or even real persons, to maintain a near total silence about the circumstances and composition of his works of prose fiction." So, not questioning whether or not God is just and whether or not this is a good world and stuff, as he did in Zadig, was quite dangerous, even though they were in the Enlightenment. And he did what he could to cover his tracks, as it were. If you think that totalitarianism and Stalinism are a 20th century phenomenon, that's not true. It's actually the oldest story in the book. The 20th century is renowned for having some alternative to Stalinism, not for inventing Stalinism. Another explanation for Voltaire's reticence about his philosophical tales is his understandable, if mistaken, belief that these were relatively inconsequential productions belonging to the much decried and maligned genre of the novel, and that they would not fare well with future readers, especially when considered alongside his far more ambitious and serious works, his tragedies, epic and philosophical poems, and historical essays. Now, we skip a little bit. The slender book Candide, which is not one of the books he thought he would be known for, first came off the press of the brothers Kramer, publishers in Geneva, in January of 1759. 1759. Now that is 16 years before the Declaration of Independence. Candide was published. 17 years, you know. It was promptly disseminated and repeatedly republished in Paris and elsewhere, even though it was swiftly condemned by both French and Swiss authorities, and copies were seized in printing shops in Paris and Geneva. It sold briskly under the counters. No official effort to suppress Candide could prevent it from becoming one of the most sensational, forbidden bestsellers of pre-revolutionary France and, indeed, Europe. Within a year, there were at least 3 English translations and 1 edition in Italian. within a year, and it was forbidden and censored. Verboten. In 1758, the 64-year-old Voltaire had personally experienced an unusually vast range of human situations and emotions, and he had become keenly aware of the existence of evil, unhappiness, and injustice in the world. He had also come to the realization that there were no satisfactory theological or philosophical explanations to justify or account for the horrors that so persistently dog humankind. Pause for half a second there. You know, in Genesis it says God made the heaven, and then he made the earth, and then he said, let there be light, and he saw that it was good, and it was good. Well, once he had turned on the lights, you know, the thing was done. But he made heaven and earth in the dark, as Ricky Gervais has pointed out. In the dark. Brilliant. Except, came out a bit messy. So that's probably the best explanation for the existence of evil, is that God was working in the dark, turned on the lights. He called it good and went forward from there, but, you know, what was done was done. So, continuing. He had acquired an enormous intellectual and multicultural frame of reference, thanks to his unquenchable intellectual curiosity, through his omnivorous reading, and especially through his extensive research for his historical works and philosophical essays. He was now at the height of his powers, at the age of 64. So those of you who have gotten to the age of 35, and you say, oh, I don't know much about history or science or literature, I was, you know, lost it in school, I went to college, college was crap, what can I do now, you know, what can I do with life? You've got another 30 years before you'll be at the height of your powers. Get going. So he was at the height of his powers and in full possession of his craft as a writer who over the decades had tirelessly practiced, perfected, and mastered all the literary genres and rhetorical techniques and devices. All of them. Truly a Renaissance man, an Enlightenment individual. So, we've got more in the introduction, but to hell with it. On to the text. Chapter 1 is How Candide was brought up in a magnificent castle, and how he was driven out of it. So his beginnings in life and good fortune, and then it went downhill a bit. Now, I have to say that usually I go through and I strike out this sentence, that sentence, skip whole paragraphs and stuff, which I started to with Voltaire here. Got down to the next page, page after that, went back, had to put back in a couple sentences I had taken out, decided to leave everything that I had taken out in because there was, once I got to the end of the story, it was all an integrated whole and there was just no place to cut anything. And then I realized I'm trying to edit Voltaire. Now, editing Christopher Hitchens, that's easy as pie. You know, anybody can cut Christopher Hitchens' writings up and take out irrelevant stuff and parse it. Cutting Aristotle, editing Aristotle, that's difficult. Time consuming. Editing Voltaire, I've found, is near impossible. And this is translated. So, well, Aristotle's translated as well, for that matter. So, unedited, without my interference. Oh, I'll mention quickly, Benjamin Franklin made it a habit to take passages of and poems and stuff like this from authors and rewrite them, and then he would come back later and see which one he thought was better, to see if he could improve on them at all. And he said he thought in a couple cases he did make some modest improvements. He was being modest about that. So that's an interesting thing to do. You learn an awful lot. So, okay, now Westphalia is a province in West Germany. In the country of Westphalia, in the castle of the most noble Baron of Thunder ten Troch, Tronckh, lived a youth whom nature had endowed with a most sweet disposition. His face was true index of his mind. He had a solid judgment joined to the most unaffected simplicity, and hence, I presume, he had his name of Candide. So, did you get the humor right there? He describes the guy, and then he says, and hence, I presume his name was Candide. I presume that's what his name would have to be, following from the description. That's how I read that. The old servants of the house suspected him to have been the son of the Baron's sister.